Good evening. Welcome to this Good Friday service hosted at Lake Harriet United Methodist Church with our partners in ministry from Living Spirit United Methodist Church. Tonight's worship service is in 3 scenes. Each will look at a different part of the final days of Jesus' life. At the end of each scene, you will have about 3 minutes to do some reflection and journaling, or to draw, or simply to be quiet and pray. You should have all received a journal when you came in. It looks like this. If you didn't, just raise your hand and one of the ushers will be sure and get one for you. Okay. At the close of tonight's worship service, you may stay in the sanctuary and pray for a time of reflection. We would ask that you exit in silence. You're also invited to go downstairs to the fellowship hall where our labyrinth is set up, and you might walk that labyrinth as a part of your Good Friday prayer experience. Then on Easter Sunday, we will join in a chorus of Alleluias as we celebrate the resurrection of Jesus. Living Spirit's Easter service is at 10:30, both in person and online. Here at Lake Harriet, our services are at 9:30 and 11, and those will both be in person and online. I'm very excited to introduce and welcome my friend, the Reverend Dr. Sean Moore, who is the pastor at Living Spirit Church. Before we begin, just for tonight, as we walk with Jesus as he takes his final earthly steps, we find ourselves in faith's most difficult hour. Listen to the story. It was on Friday that they ended it all. Of course, they didn't do it one by one. They weren't brave enough. All the stones at one time, or no stones thrown at all. They did it in crowds. In crowds where you can feel safe and lose yourself and shout things you would never shout on your own, and do a thing you would never do if you felt the camera was watching you. It was a crowd in the church that did it, and a crowd in the civil service that did it, and a crowd in the street that did it, and a crowd on the hill that did it, and he said nothing. He took the insults, the bruises, the spit on the face, the thongs on the back, the curses in the ears. He took the sight of his friends turning away, running away, and he said nothing. He let them do their worst until their worst was done. As on Friday, they ended it all and would have finished themselves had he not cried out, "Father, forgive them." And so began the revolution. Please rise in body or in spirit for the call to worship and our opening hymn. O God, our God, in you our ancestors trusted. To you they cried aloud. Since before our mothers bore us, you have been our God. Do not be far from us, for trouble is near. Lest we forget the cost of discipleship, let us remember faith's hardest story to bear. Let us continue in worship as we sing, "My Song is Love Unknown."
Good evening. I'm Isaiah Friesen, Director of Online Ministries at Living Spirit, and I will be reading from the Gospel of Matthew chapter 26, verses 17 through 25. On the first day of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus, saying, "Where do you want us to make the preparations for the Passover?" He said, "Go into the city to a certain man and tell him, 'The teacher says, my time is near. I will keep the Passover at your house with my disciples.'" So the disciples did as Jesus had directed them, and they prepared the Passover meal. When it was evening, he took his place with the 12, and while they were eating, he said, "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me." And they became greatly distressed and began to say to him one after another, "Surely not I, Lord?" He answered, "The one who has dipped his hand into the bowl with me will betray me. The Son of Man goes as it is written of him. But woe to that one by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that one not to have been born." Judas, who betrayed him, said, "Surely not I, Rabbi." He replied, "You have said so."
As a former police officer, I'm always interested in the residue of a crime scene. If you will, imagine the upper room. No lights are on, maybe a candle, natural light, but it's empty. The food is all gone. There's chunks of bread. A little bit of wine has been left over, but they're no longer there anymore. Earlier that day, Jesus says, "Go and prepare the meal." This wouldn't be the first time or the second, but the third and last time. On this occasion, they are talking about liberation and they're sharing stories, but Jesus does something different. He says, "One of you have set me up." They all begin to say, no, not me, not me. Jesus knew who the traitor was. Even knowing this, he still served them wine, he drank, he proclaimed, "This will be the last time I drink with you, time with you with the kingdom of God." During this time, he establishes the new covenant. They worshiped God, and they got up and they walked out to the Mount of Olives. Behold, an empty room with just a residue of bread and juice. After
invite you to pull out your journals now. We're going to spend about 3 minutes in silent prayer and reflection. It may seem like a long time, but I encourage you to just rest into it and see what God has for you today.
Friesen. I'm the director of Living Spirits Online Ministries, and I will be reading from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 27, verses 15 through 31. Now at the festival, the governor was accustomed to release a prisoner for the crowd, anyone whom they wanted. At that time, they had a notorious prisoner called Jesus Barabbas. So after they gathered, Pilate said to them, "Who do you want me to release for you, Jesus Barabbas or Jesus who is called the Messiah?" For he realized that it was out of jealousy that they had handed Jesus over. While he was sitting on the judgment seat, Pilate's wife sent word to him, "Have nothing to do with that innocent man, for today I have suffered a great deal because of a dream about him." Now the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowds to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus killed. The governor again said to them, "Which of the two do you want me to release for you?" And they said, "Barabbas." Pilate said to them, "Then what should I do with Jesus who is called the Messiah?" All of them said, "Let him be crucified." Then he asked, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Let him be crucified." So when Pilate saw that he could do nothing, but rather that a riot was beginning, he took some water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves." Then the people as a whole answered, "His blood be on us and on our children." So he released Barabbas for them, and after flogging Jesus, he handed him over to be crucified. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the governor's headquarters, and they gathered the whole cohort around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and after twisting some thorns into a crown, they put it on his head. They put a reed in his right hand and knelt before him and mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" They spat on him and took the reed and struck him on the head. After mocking him, they stripped him of the robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him away to crucify him.
Hello, court. My name is Judas Iscariot, and I am here as a representation of the prosecution in today's trial. Unfortunately, many of the key witnesses refused to step forward, but the high priest Caiaphas has agreed to speak on behalf of himself and the other priests, who I see are currently outside wielding swords and clubs. So thus the prosecution calls the high priest Caiaphas to the stand. High priest, can you please speak to when you first heard of the complaints against this man called Jesus?
Yes. The chief priests and the elders of the people gathered in my palace during the festival of Passover. They wanted to arrest Jesus quietly and have him sentenced to death, but ultimately they chose not to act during the festival, as a riot may have started among the people.
And did you meet again after this time?
While I did not meet with them, I was informed of a meeting of the chief priests. During this meeting, a man by the name of Judas Iscariot approached the priests. I believe that you know this next part, as that same man was you. You approached the priests and asked them what you might receive if you betrayed your master, Jesus, and they offered you 30 pieces of silver.
Were you aware of the next steps of the plan?
Indeed. It was your job to betray Jesus by leading the chief priests to him. You approached Jesus, kissed him on the cheek, and then he was arrested, and he was brought to me at the palace.
And now what crimes was Jesus committed of?
The chief priests conferred. They hemmed and hawed. It was quite a while before they could come with anything against Jesus. Everything they brought forward was false, until two finally came forward with a crime.
And what was that crime?
One of the priests gave testimony, saying that Jesus said he was able to destroy the temple of God and build it again in 3 days. I could not believe it. I questioned Jesus, asking, "Have you no answer to this? What is it they testify against you?"
And what did Jesus have to say to this?
Nothing. So I put him to oath before our God. I asked him to tell us if he was the Messiah, the Son of God.
And?
He said, "You have said so. But I tell you, from now on you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." I became distraught. I tore all of my clothes at this utter blasphemy, and I said so. I was incredulous. There wasn't a reason to have any witnesses or testimony at all. The verdict was obvious, but it was still sent to the priests for their verdict, and the verdict put upon him was death.
In order to bring about this sentence, what was your last step?
In the morning, after he was jailed for the night, the elders and the chief priests bound him, led him away, and brought him to the governor, Pilate.
Thank you, High Priest. The prosecution rests. At this time, I invite you to take out your journals and reflect. If you chose to pick up a nail on your way in, I invite you to hold that in your hands and reflect on what that might mean for you, what it means for Jesus, and what it means for this day.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Isaiah Friesen, Director of Online Ministries at Living Spirit, and I will be reading from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 23, verses 32 to 43. 2 others also, who were criminals, were led away to be put to death with Jesus. When they came to the place that is called the Skull, they crucified Jesus there with the criminals, one on his right and the other on his left. Then Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they are doing." And they cast lots to divide his clothing. And the people stood by, watching. But the leaders scoffed at him, saying, "He saved others. Let him save himself if he is the Messiah of God, his chosen one." The soldiers also mocked him, coming up and offering him sour wine, and saying, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." There was also an inscription over him, "This is the King of the Jews." One of the criminals who were hanged there kept deriding Jesus and saying, "Are you not the Messiah? Save yourself and us." But the other rebuked him, saying, "Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed have been condemned justly, for we are getting what we deserve for our deeds, but this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." He replied, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise."
It was meant to horrify the world. It was meant for humiliation. It was meant to last for days. It was meant for slow asphyxiation. It was meant to prolong torture. It was the Roman soldier's job. It was meant to be used by Caesar.
But instead, it was used by God.
It was meant to stop a movement.
But instead, it became the way.
It was meant to act on fear.
But instead, it awakened faith.
It was meant to be vicious and violent.
But instead, it became our peace.
It was meant to uproot hope.
But instead, it became the seed.
It was meant to punish captives.
But instead, it unleashed freedom.
It was meant to build up Rome.
But instead, it built God's kingdom.
It was meant to discourage rebels. It was meant to stop insurrection. It was meant to put down Jesus.
But instead, it set up the resurrection.
It was meant to jeer and mock him.
But instead, it was his glory.
It was meant to erase a chapter.
But instead, it became his story.
It was meant to hold up convicts.
But instead, it raised up a king.
It was meant to shut our mouths.
But instead, it's why we sing.
It was meant to be a judgment.
But instead, it became our mercy. It's why the song of heaven is the Lamb is worthy.
It was meant to kill an enemy, crush dissenters, and diversion.
But instead, it became the banner of God's love for every person.
It was meant to be appalling, nailing hands and feet to wood. It was meant to be used for evil.
But instead, it was used for good.
It was meant to be a symbol of God's assassination.
But instead, it became the symbol of Jesus' invitation. Come to the cross.
Instead of sin and stain,
you are meant to be made clean.
instead of being forgotten,
You are meant to know you are seen.
instead of being ashamed,
You can leave behind your guilt.
instead of feeling empty,
You were meant to be fulfilled.
instead of being broken, you were meant to be made whole. Here, Calvary is calling. It beckons you. Behold,
Come to the cross.
Instead of being an accident,
You have purpose and a plan.
instead of being abandoned,
You were chosen by God's hand.
for all who said, I can't.
God has said, I can.
No matter what you've done, the invitation stands.
Come to the cross.
Instead of being doubtful,
You are meant to know your Savior. You are meant to be God's son. You are meant to be God's daughter. You were cherished from the start. You were always in the picture.
instead of being a victim,
You were meant to be a victor.
the result of Jesus' blood,
Salvation has arrived.
instead of being dead,
You were meant to be alive. The cross.
It was meant to signal death.
But instead, it's a sign of living.
It was meant to be the end.
But instead, it's our beginning.
Lord. Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble. Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they nailed him to the tree? Sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they pierced him in the side? Were you there when the sun refused to shine? Were you there when the sun refused to sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when the sun refused to shine? Were you there when they laid him in the tomb? Were you there when they laid him in the sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they laid him in the
Let us weep with Mary Magdalene, societal outcast, faithful disciple, whose hair and tears knew these now pierced feet. We join her in intimate memory.
Let us look upon Pontius Pilate, conflicted man of authority, permission giver of the crucifixion, the hastening of death, the removal of the body. We ponder with him the power of systems and our own power.
Let us help Joseph of Arimathea, suburbanite of means, remover of Jesus' body. We know, with him, the holy mystery of being present to human death.
Let us walk with Nicodemus, the man of a religious establishment, secret visitor to Jesus, carrying heavy spices for the body's burial. We feel the weight he bears.
My past became my prison. Love was waiting with the key. My story was my failure. Now my story is redeemed. Oh, my freedom's written in your nail-scarred hand. Where there was sin and shame, the cross now stands. The grave no longer tells me who I am. 'Cause my freedom's written in your nail-scarred hands. Oh, your blood has paid my ransom. Your wounds have made me whole. Now every day is brighter. Oh, your love's a miracle. My freedom's written in your nail-scarred hands. Where there was sin and shame, the cross now stands. The grave no longer tells me who I am. My freedom's written in your nail-scarred hands. I'm alive, yes I am free indeed. I'm alive, you resurrected me. I'm alive, oh death, where is your sting? I'm alive, I'm claiming victory. My freedom's written in your nail-scarred hands. Where there was sin and shame, the cross now stands. The grave no longer tells me who I am. My freedom's written in your nail-scarred hands. Oh, my freedom's written in your nail-scarred hands. My freedom's written in your nail-scarred hands. Where there was sin and shame, the cross now stands. The grave no longer tells me who I am. 'Cause my freedom's written in those nail-scarred hands.
It's Friday, but Sundays are coming. It's Friday, but Sunday's going to come. If you can, please stand for the benediction. Hold fast to hope. Hold fast to one another. For God, who has permission, is faithful. The day of God approaches. Go in peace. Amen.